Well, here we are now, well over a week since our exit from the playoffs. Obviously, you've had quite a bit of time probably to think about it, more so than perhaps immediately after the game when you last spoke to the media. Any different thoughts now to then, or very much the same?
In terms of the actual game, the same. We got physically dominated, which is something that hasn't happened to us all season. Reflecting on it personally, I've spoken to all the players individually. Obviously, it's a bit surreal in the dressing room afterwards because it's immense disappointment, and it's some of them you don't see again. Normally you get them back for a meeting at the training ground, but with the situation that we're in, I didn't want to be dragging people from an hour, 2 hours away from their home. So we had a phone call with all the players. Probably took about a week to get it all done, and just reflected on what they thought, what their feelings were. Obviously difficult conversations the next day in terms of releasing people from their contracts. So it's been a long week. But in terms of me, have I let it go? Yeah, not a problem. Watched the game the other day. Probably adds to the frustration. But it is what it is. It's just crack on.
Again, it's that classic case of being so close to achieving something, but yet, and I've heard so many people say it, if you'd offered us fourth in the table and a playoff place at the start of the season, it would have snapped your hand off. So do you still look back on the season with a huge amount of pride, or do you sit there and think, what if?
No, I'm pretty pragmatic about the whole thing. It's in terms of, even with the game, we would have drawn the first game 0-0 and got beat 1-0 at home. Everyone gone, what a great season. Well, nothing's different. We lost by a goal. Just the way it went around. The game evolved. But no, as a general rule, I think you'd step back and assess the season. Take away the emotion. The emotion dictates when people go, oh, it'd be disappointment, we should have done this and we should have done that. That's based on pure emotion. The facts are we've not finished above 16th for quite a few years. We finished fourth in the league, we played some decent football, and we gave a good account of ourselves in the playoffs. It just all went wrong on the last 90 minutes. So it's not bad to have one particularly bad 90 minutes in nearly 12 months. So that's the bit I reflect on. Obviously, I had the emotion after the game, but you can't make emotional decisions. I think when you make emotional decisions is when you make bad decisions. So reflecting on what we did well, what we didn't do well, that's good, bad and indifferent. Can you improve on the good things? Can you cut out the bad things and then use it as fuel for next season?
What do you think was your team's biggest strength over the course of the season?
Ironically, probably there to get the rigidness, the solidness of the team. Again, you don't have the goal difference. A, the goal difference, and B, the goal against column, without being hard to beat and organised and rigid and solid and all those things. And people watch this back and go, yeah, but what about the last game? Yeah, the last game it didn't happen. Clearly, that's why we got beat 3-0. But over the season, we did it particularly well. To have the best defensive record in the EFL speaks for itself. And within that, it wasn't like we were 4-5-1 or 5-4-1, and we were defensive and we hardly scored a goal. We were quite high in the goals column, and we played some decent footballers along the way as well.
Yeah, as you often say, football is always evolving. The 3-5-2 formation itself, whilst you've been, has evolved gradually with different bits you've added into it with different players. Do you feel that next season it's going to have to evolve again, because of course there's a chance to freshen things up, but also maybe teams are going to sort of know a bit more about Cheltenham Town and the way we like to play?
Yeah, there's always, this year we've flipped between having a 2 sitters and a number 10. Generally Broomy was the number 10, but we have flipped it in other formations when we've played like a deep lier and played 2 8s. So depends on recruitment. One thing we did do well last year, we did well in the loan market, which is there's definitely not a formula, guaranteed formula for that. There's always a little bit. Whenever you take young players on first-time loans particularly, that's always a bit of a gamble. But people like Sheafy, Greavesy, Jake, it wasn't his first loan. He had 6 months at Cambridge, but he'd hardly played. So credit goes to them because they were excellent. And we have to do the same. We've got to try and recruit well and find maybe different ways if something happens that we do need to flip it. Even this year, we've gone to 4-3-3 a few times. We just shoved toes into the midfield just when things are going against us. So 12 months ago, we only had that 1-3-5-2. We could only play it one way. We can tweak it now, and now it's improving it again and adding detail and something that I've done during the lockdown, and the players have as well. To be fair, they've watched quite a lot of other teams playing similar-ish format, whether it's a 3-4-3, whether it's the way Sheffield United play, whether it's Inter Milan, Juve. lots of teams to try and learn. They're not bad teams to learn from, so you can always strive to improve.
Yeah, many teams have already been busy in the off-season preparing their teams next season. Of course, you had a whole sort of extra 6 weeks probably to worry about the season that has just finished for us. In terms of recruitment for next year, I imagine your phone's red hot right now. Is it obviously even harder for us, given that we've had a shorter time scale compared to some other clubs?
I don't know. It never stops. So even during the lockdown, you're still talking to people. You still, like I said, you're still watching players, still watching clips. It's difficult because we still don't know quite where we're at financially in terms of crowds, budgets. So we're still in the dark. Not in the dark, but we still don't know for sure. So that is a difficult part. But we are speaking to people, speaking to other managers about players, speaking to agents as you always do, speaking to players. When they actually get across the line, I know there's some clubs that have been particularly busy already, but I think at the minute to be signing players and paying players that you don't know when the season's going to start. So that's why a lot of clubs, I think it will get quicker and quicker as it normally does once we get an actual start date.
Yeah, of course, you're always looking ahead to the next game, but also all too well that, especially from a business perspective, you've got to be thinking about actually months ahead and contracts and financial situations. You would have had plans, I'm sure, on whether being a League One or League Two club for next season. Because of the lockdown and the impact that's had, have suddenly all those plans been ripped up and suddenly you're having to start afresh literally within a few weeks ago? Is that the case?
No, you've got lists all the time. So you've always got a list of goalkeepers, same with centre-halves, same with loans. So some loans, as soon as we lost the playoff semi-final, right, you can rip them up because they're not coming in because we're not in League One. So it's constantly evolving. It's not a case of the season's finished, who are we going to sign? It's Alfie May was a prime example. We tried to get Alfie 12 months before we signed him, so 18 months ago. So it's not a case of, sometimes you don't always get them. Sometimes there's a lot of work goes into deals that people will never know because you get so close and all of a sudden it falls down, or you get trumped somewhat by somebody else. But that's something that Mickey particularly, but myself, the staff, are constantly evaluating where are we financially, because as soon as the budget goes, right, it's going from this to this, right, 3 names come off that list. So you've always got your Kevin De Bruyne, you take him in a heartbeat. But the fact is, I don't think we'll sign him, so we'll move him. But obviously, realistic targets within where we fit. And if they come, they come. They don't, they don't.
You mentioned the loan market and getting that right this season. That's been commented on by a lot of people. Is that something that, especially for a club like Cheltenham, and given the financial impact perhaps of the COVID-19 pandemic, is going to be another crucial thing maybe for the club next season?
I think this club needs to do it well. And when I mean that, I mean building a relationship with bigger clubs that they trust us to have their players and not use them just as cheap subs. So some clubs will take loan players and they go, well, we can get him on 1/10 of his wages, but we'll just sit him on the bench and that'll fill our bench. I think it's proved since I've been in, it's something I've been conscious of. So Jacob Maddox played 40 odd games last season from Chelsea, went to a League One club. Didn't quite work for him there, but we've done our part of the bargain. So you look at the lads that all came in, more the younger ones. Obviously Gav Riley was fantastic when he came in, but you're looking at the younger ones who you're getting at, well, peanuts really, in terms of what we're actually contributing to their wage, but what we are contributing now, we're contributing to their football development, which is what the big clubs want. So they're not bothered about the money. It's the experience, it's the first team environment, it's playing in front of crowds, ironically. It's that sort of experience that they don't get at 23s. So we want bigger clubs, particularly local ones, to recognise that we will look after them, they will get coached. We do try and play what is perceived to be the right way. Obviously, there's many different ways to play, but I think they're important relationships that we need to try and build. And don't get me wrong, the players take the credit, because if they're not good enough, they don't play. Ultimately, you can say dress it all up to the clubs, but if the player comes in and he's proved that he's not up to the mark, he won't play. But that comes down to your recruitment as well. That generally we've got it okay, and that's not to say that next year you bring 4 loans in and you send them all back within a month because you've got it wrong or they've got it wrong. But the general feeling that, can we build relationships? Can bigger clubs trust us to look after their players? And that's what we're trying to do.
You've done both sides of it now. Obviously been a League Two manager and also been an under-23s Premier League manager. There's often this talk, isn't there, about trying to put like Premier League B teams into lower league English football and stuff. Having now done both sides of it, do you think there's something for that, or do you think no, completely you've got to keep it as the pyramid has often been?
I think this is a personal point of view. When I was at Burnley, my thoughts were it shouldn't be under 23s, it should be under 20s. So they've sort of done a model now where you go to under 18s, and then you have your 2 years at your in your under 23s. But you need to be ready for first team football by the age of 20. If you're not ready for first team, you've missed the boat, in my opinion. So at Burnley, they worked on the model that if at 20, if after your second year pro, you weren't ready to go into the football league for a football league loan, you weren't ready enough for them because they're a Premier League club. And I think experience, myself, it worked for me. I went through the leagues, but by the time I was 20, 21, I played 100, 150 senior games. So it's getting the balance between the two, because if you're 23, 24 and all you've done is played 23s football, you might be technically brilliant, but you won't know the game in terms of the nuts and bolts of when something like Monday night's happening, you'd be lost, you wouldn't know what's going on. But you do need time to evolve your technical ability, your tactical understanding when it's almost like a classroom environment. So it's getting that blend of the two. Obviously, you get the odd one. So Dwight McNeil at Burnley just went straight through the system. Didn't go out on loan, but he was in the 23s at 16, and he was in the first team at 18. So you get the odd one that goes straight through. But I think if you can get a blend of we tried to do it with Lloydie last year. Lloydie had 6 months out on loan at Hereford, and then he had 6 months with us. So that was almost like a microwave version of what we're trying to do. He's had a year with us this year, so we might need to go out on loan for a few months next year to get his game experience up. So just trying to tick every box.
Yeah, you mentioned first-time loans as well, and obviously a bit of a risk with them. Whether it's yourself or Mickey Moore or someone else who's watching these first-time loans, obviously playing in under-23s football, how would you know that they're able to physically then cope with the Football League? Is that a risk you take, or is that something that you look at when you see a player, you know that he's going to be able to do it just by looking at him? That's
the difficult part, because it sounds terrible, but sometimes you go and watch 23 games and you've switched off after half an hour because you go there to watch a player, but obviously you meet lots of different people, and sometimes you learn more talking to people than what you do actually watching the game. So that is the tough part, because a lot of them, Jake Doyle can run, and he's shown he does like the physical side of it. But when you go and watch him in 23s football, he never really showed that side of it. So that's trying to do your homework and do other people who work with him every day know their personality. Because that's the tough part, because it is a different game. It's a possession-based game. It's sterile because there is no crowds, and it's not end-to-end. It doesn't matter if they're 1-0 down. It's very rarely they're going to put the two centre-halves up front and start crashing it, because they're just going to play the way they play. So that is ultimate. That's the real hard part of, can he cope physically? And until you throw him in the deep end, and other things. So you've got Greavesy and Sheafy, they've moved away from home for the first time. So will they cope just living out of their comfort zone in terms of, can they cook for themselves? Can they look after themselves? All these sorts of things. It's difficult to watch a game of football and know whether he's going to be able to look after himself and cook a meal. So again, that's why it's a risk. Not a risk, but it is a risk for first time loans, because you just don't know what you're going to get. Some sink, some swim. I think fair to say that all of the young lads today we've had this season flourished.
Yeah, and again on that loan risk, obviously you've only experienced either half season or long-term loans, because they've changed the rules a few years back about you could no longer have 28-day emergency loans. Does that make the risk even harder? Because the last thing you want to discover is if you sign someone in August and by mid-September you're thinking, I've got to keep hold of this lad till January potentially.
It's not happened to us yet. We don't. But like you say, that is, you can only have 5, and they are a big part of what we do. So they're always going to make up close to 20-25% of our squad. So you've got all them wrong, then you're down to bare bones, and you can't change it until you can send them back, but you can't get anyone else. So that's again, probably a bit of an insight into how many things go into a tick box of when you sign a player. Is he a good player? Yeah, but there's so many other things they've got to tick before you think, I think he's worth a punt.
Obviously, again, so much up in the air right now. I know the EFL having meetings all the time. In terms of your teams getting back to it, preparation for the new season, have you made plans for that in terms of date of when players, etc., can be expected to return?
Well, we've penciled in what we thought was going to be the start date, and we've penciled in a return to training date. But even you know, I've had a conversation with Paul Godfrey on the way here today, and that looks like it might change. So it is just sort of waiting and seeing at the minute, but it's difficult because people want to go away, they do want a break, they want a mental break, they want to know when, right, I can shut down for this period of time, but it's the times we're in at the minute, it's the times of uncertainty.